Ants in my bed. Ants in my bed. Table of contents. Introduction. When I was 9 years old, I spent the summer with my great-grandmother. Graham lived in a large, gray, cedar shakes house at the seashore. I stayed in the yellow bedroom where my father slept as a boy. The room's window faced the ocean, and the sound of the waves breaking against the shore always helped me sleep. At least it did until the ants showed up a few weeks into my visit. I spent the first few weeks exploring the sea and saving the lives of some horseshoe crabs. I also had been busy riding the old bike Graham's friend Jim gave me. I was not allowed to ride very far on the weekends because the town and beach became crowded with tourists. During the week, I explored as I pleased. Jim usually dropped by in the mornings to eat breakfast with Graham and me. Sometimes he'd stick around to help Graham with big chores around the house. Other times he would take me down to the shore and teach me how to make sandcastles. Sandcastles. I always looked for different ways to make my castles special. I used varying sizes of cups, buckets, spoons, shovels, garden tools, and toys to create wondrous castles big enough for seagulls or small enough for ants to march through. Sometimes I made castles hoping the ants in my bed would make it their new home. I settled for placing toy people in and around the castle once it was finished. To make a sandcastle, first I would smooth out a flat surface to support it. Next I would dig up very wet sand, but not dripping wet, and pack it tight into a bucket mold. Then I would gently tap the sand out to form the base of my castles. I added details by pressing wet sand together in my hands and smoothing it up into lookout towers, balconies, and protective walls. Sometimes I dug a deep moat or ditch around the castle and filled it with water. I often dripped watery sand on the edges to make fancy designs along the roof and down the walls. As a final touch, I would add shells, driftwood, seaweed, and sea glass that I had collected with Jim earlier in the morning. Sea glass. Sometimes Jim took me with him to walk down the beach and look for gifts from the sea. Jim called the treasures we found gifts because once in a great while he would find something very interesting. He had found pieces of metal or wood from ships, teeth from a big fish, and even coins. Jim especially liked to find sea glass, which he collected. Jim told me sea glass is broken glass that has been worn smooth over time by the wind, waves, and sand. This makes the sharp edges rounded so they feel nice to hold. The little pieces of glass glowed brilliantly when the sun shined into them. Jim found most of his sea glass during the low tide after a storm churned up the ocean. He said most of what washed in with the tide was from the early 1900s when people threw glass overboard from steamboats. When I went with Jim to look for the gifts, we would sort through what we had collected before I built my sandcastle that day. Early in my visit, I had learned to ask Graham for the local tide reports in the mornings. She explained how I could listen for them on the radio or read them in the local newspaper too. I wanted to find out the best times for finding sea glass and for building my castles. Much to my dismay, during the high tide, the incoming waves destroyed my castles, washed them right into the sea. Graham said that the tides, or the ebb and flow of seawater, is caused by the attraction or pull of the sun and moon. About every 12 hours, I would say goodbye to that day's castle. Then I could start all over again, building different castles and trying out new ways to shape and decorate them. Visitors. I was having a terrific summer. Graham gave me easy chores like making my bed, washing the dishes, and sweeping her porches. I was usually free to roam my part of the beach between two jetties, ride my bicycle, read books, make friends with visiting children, or explore the shops in town. I had just one problem, and I didn't know how to solve it. I had ants in my bed. The ants didn't actually live in my bed, they just crawled across it. It seemed to be an obstacle in their path. Instead of going around me, they climbed over me. I wasn't sleeping well, thinking of creepy, crawly ants skittering across me in the night. I didn't want to smash or stomp or spray the ants. I just wanted them to crawl somewhere else. I went to the town's library and asked the librarian where I could check out books about ants to find a solution to my dilemma. I looked through many and checked out 4 and headed back to Graham's house. Ant life cycle: egg, larva, pupa, worker ant. Ants. As I read, I learned that ants live in colonies which may exist for many years. Each colony has at least one queen that lays eggs. In about 25 days, the eggs turn into larvae. In another 10 days, the larva makes white cocoons to cover themselves. Inside the cocoons, the larvae turn into an ant-shaped pupa. Altogether, it takes almost 60 days for a new worker ant to be born. In just one colony, thousands of worker ants find food, build nests, and take care of the queen and her young. The book said ants eat a variety of foods such as insects, seeds, and nectar, which is the sweet juice plants produce. I found out that ants have 3 parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. The head contains the brain, 2 eyes, the jaws, and the antenna. The eyes of an ant are called compound eyes because each eye is actually made up of many eyes. The jaws of an ant open and close like scissors. Ants use their antenna to hear, taste, smell, and communicate by touching each other. This was all pretty interesting, but I still didn't know how to get the ants off my bed. Ant head, compound eyes, abdomen, thorax, head, jaws, antenna, the ant body. Ant parts: node, legs, claws. As I kept reading, I learned the thorax contained 3 pairs of legs. At the end of each leg is a sharp claw that helps the ant to climb up walls. An ant has such strong legs that if a man could run as fast as an ant, he'd be able to keep up with a racehorse. The abdomen contains the stomach. Between the thorax and the abdomen are 1 or 2 bumps called nodes. Ants do not breathe as we do because they do not have lungs. They have holes all over their body which take in oxygen and send out carbon dioxide. Finally, I came to a part in one book that talked about how ants lay scented trails to find the way from their nests to food and back. I decided that the ants in my room must have laid a scented trail that went across my bed. I knew I had to find their nest. I'd read it could be under a stone, under a log, or in a garden. Worker ants often come into houses looking for crumbs of food, especially sweet things. I thought I had been careful eating in my room, but Graham's yummy cookies, especially her peanut butter ones, did crumble. Ants carry food, such as cookies, to the nest after softening it with saliva and biting off a piece. I read that an ant can carry 20 to 50 times its body weight. I weighed 75 pounds. That meant if I were as strong as an ant, I could carry from 1,500 to 3,750 pounds. The search. I tried to follow the ants that were crawling into my room to find where they were coming from and where they were going. I discovered they were finding crumbs on my floor and in my bed. Then they were carrying the crumbs near the window where they escaped between the woodwork and the wall. I went outside and tried to find them coming out of the house. I saw many ants, but none were carrying crumbs of cookies. Maybe they lived under the house. Maybe they lived in the walls. I decided I needed to confess to Gram. I told Gram about the ants and even about the cookie crumbs. I also said that I did not want to hurt them. I just wanted to get them off my bed. I asked Gram if I could use her vacuum to sweep up the crumbs in my room. I also asked if I could move the bed. I cleaned my room, changed the sheets, and scooted my bed closer to the window. I vowed not to eat cookies in my room anymore. I wondered if this would end my ant problems. As I lay in my bed that night, I thought about all the ants that had been crawling in my room. I decided to ask Gram if I could put some honey on the ground under my bedroom window to feed the ants, since I had taken away their food source. I closed my eyes with a smile on my face. Then I heard some strange noises outside my window. I looked out and saw winged things flying around in the moonlight. These black flying things seemed to swoop back and forth from the house. Oh no! We have bats in the attic!